Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Saturday, November the 1st, 2025. And if you're celebrating, happy All Saints Day to you. Otherwise, I hope everybody had a nice, safe, and fun Halloween yesterday. Today, we're shifting gears. Since October is over, spooky season has ended. We will be moving away from Poe, and we read a lot of Poe, and I think I got certain things out of reading Poe that I was able to grow and appreciate him more than I had perhaps before. But there were still things that were difficult for me with him, especially trying to be more analytical and less evaluative. There were times in which I was struggling with some poems I just didn't feel were as rich or complex as some of the other things that I've read on this channel. So I'm a little bit happy to be leaving him behind, despite the fact that, I learned some things and there were some fun times in there. Revisiting old poems that I had known well, like The Raven, but then also working with, learning about, and exploring newer poems that I hadn't encountered necessarily before, like The Bells. If you hear noise right now, the fan on my computer is running, so there's a little bit of a hum in the back, and you might hear some snoring from my walking buddy back there. We're going to go for a walk in a little bit. And so the poem that I'm going to do today is going to be one of the shorter ones, despite this next poet being somebody who often wrote long, complex, spiraling, multi-part poems. And the next poet we're going to turn to, sort of cute, too clever by half sort of way, I was going to wait and do in April, but I decided now is a perfect time, just because of my enthusiasm for them. And that is T.S. Eliot. So we'll be reading some poems for a while from T.S. Eliot, and this book is the collected poems of Eliot, 1909 to 1962, which I believe was published in 1963, 2 years before his death in 65. And this was the collection that was cited as sort of the occasion of his Nobel Prize selection, his Nobel Prize win. When you win a Nobel Prize, you don't win for a specific book like you might, the PEN/Faulkner Award or the National Book Award or the Pulitzer, but rather it's often for a body of work. Still, they at times will cite a particular work as being exemplary or emblematic of your contributions to literature, and this was the one that was for him, as I think these collected stories was for Faulkner, which is interesting because Faulkner writes incredible short stories, but I think his novels are where the true innovations are there. Nevertheless, Eliot I'm enthusiastic about this because Eliot is a favorite poet of mine, maybe my favorite poet, despite the fact that he had very problematic political views, especially later in his life. I find his work to be incredibly complex, sometimes vexing, sometimes frustrating, very rich. He's one that I can come back to multiple times, read the same poem multiple times and pull new things out of, revise my own ideas and observations about it. He is somebody who I think straddles this line where he's not so difficult that he's almost impenetrable, like, say, the cantos of Ezra Pound, but he's also not, I don't want to say surface, but a kind of less complex naturalist or imagist, someone like William Carlos Williams or Robert Frost. Eliot is somebody who was very highly educated, was very serious about the canon, very serious about tradition. He pulls multiple languages into his texts. He's constantly dropping allusions to other texts because he believed that the body of literature was something that was alive and that was each new contribution changed and reinvigorated the whole line of canonical literature and canonical texts, which is something that you can see him doing in The Wasteland, for example. And he was a native of St. Louis, which was my hometown, and then moves to London later in his life, still as a rather young person, and spends a lot of his time in London. So you can read him sort of as an American poet or as a English poet. But he's not strictly beholden to old forms. He often calls upon them in order to reform them and to work on his own modernist project, namely trying to capture some element of consciousness and the fragmentary nature of consciousness and human experience in an urbanizing world and in a world that is increasingly violent. He's writing after World War I and then after World War II. Something about living through two world wars, I think, really gets you to speak to moments of despair and melancholy, and the idea of trying to reach for enchantment within a disillusioned world. Um, and so I just find him very relevant and very rich. The poem I'm going to read today is a shorter one, so that we can get out for a walk, Cooper and I. But it comes from his first, I think the first collection that sort of put him on the map, which was Prufrock and Other Poems. Prufrock is a favorite poem of mine, and I'll read it later in the series, but that's not the one I'm going to read today. This collection came out in 1917, and I'm going to read a rather shorter one, which is called Morning at the Window. And yeah, I'll just read it and offer a few comments and observations. I think it's nice to start with kind of a shorter, bite-sized, more manageable piece of Eliot before jumping into some of his longer pieces. If you are with us for the series, I hope you'll have some patience, because there are going to be times where I'm very confused and I'm going to scramble and I'm going to grasp and fumble. And I think that's just a part of reading poetry in general, but especially reading a poet as difficult as Eliot is. But I still think it's worth beginning conversations. So this is Morning at the Window from 1917 by T.S. Eliot. They are rattling breakfast plates in basement kitchens. And along the trampled edges of the street, I am aware of the damp souls of housemaids sprouting despondently at area gates. The brown waves of fog toss up to me the twisted faces from the bottom of the street, and tear from a passerby with muddy skirts an aimless smile that hovers in the air and vanishes along the level of the roofs. That's it. So, as I mentioned, Eliot often tries to call back to old masters and to use their forms or refine their forms. In this case, I'm told this is an attempt at a Spenserian stanza, it being 9 lines long, but it's broken into 2 stanzas, the first being 4 lines, the second being 5. And yet it does not follow the rhyme scheme established in a Spenserian stanza, which is supposed to have 8 lines of iambic pentameter and then end in an Alexandrine, which is a line of 12 syllables, 12 syllables in iambs. And it's supposed to go as a rhyme scheme A, B, A, B, B, C, B, C, C. And yet we don't see that here. We get kitchens, street, housemaids, gate, me, street, skirts, air, roofs. No consistency there, other than we have the repetition of street ending the second line of both stanzas. And there does not also seem to be a regular rhythm to this. I was counting out the syllables, and they kind of vary from 8 to 12 throughout. Both of the stanzas are 1 sentence long. The first one has a comma at the end of the first line, and the second has a comma at the end of the second line. So they're not enjammed. There's an end stop there, but it is one entire stanza, one entire sentence, and thus one entire image or one entire thought, in this case, an observation. The point of view here is of someone alone looking through a window. And so they have a distant and objective point of view, one that is merely about observation and trying to be not emotive about that observation. You can hear really some imagism within this. And so I think there's a strong influence of Pound right here on Eliot, as well as some kind of cross-contamination with William Carlos Williams. And you'll see what I mean later when we get to the more ornate and adorned poetry of Eliot. But this is pretty straightforward. If I were teaching this to students, they might say, why is this a poem? It just sounds like prose. It just sounds like a brief description of exactly what this person's seeing. And I think that's a really good question, because Eliot often is going to make us confront what is a poem? What can a poem do? And when you break those expectations and those formal and stylistic traditions, are you making something new, or are you still kind of playing within that ballpark and stretching our expectations? So to get into this in particular, we have that distant point of view that I mentioned, and it's a depiction of modern London life, modern urban life, of the isolated viewer. And isolation is going to be isolation and alienation are going to be big themes recurrent throughout Eliot. And what the viewer is describing is things that are routine and monotonous. So in the first line, we get rattling breakfast plates in basement kitchens, right? Waking up in the morning and going through your normal morning routine. And then there's the kind of lower class, the housemaids that are arriving at the gates, going to work in the morning, lining up, going to work. But also, we're being reminded of kind of that barrier between the people who work and the people whom they work for. We have sonic imagery right at the beginning, the rattling plates, even the trampled edges of the street. That's something that you can see, and then something that you can hear as the housemaids are moving along, right? You can see trampled edges of the street in the sense that they're worn, but you can also hear as you're reading the poem the trampling of the people, the housemaids, as they're going to work. I think it's interesting that we begin with a "they are rattling." We're put right into the present progressive, and we have a they, a pronoun with no referent right away, with no antecedent. And so it's like we're dropped right into the middle of somebody's thoughts, and we have to catch up. It does not say at the beginning, my neighbors are doing this. It just is a they. And so there's also an anonymity or a lack of recognition, not being acquainted with people. It's just the they, them over there. And then on the third line, we get I am aware. So that's where the speaker then posits themselves, but places themselves also within the image that's being created in this poem. They're placed within the poem itself. It becomes first person here. And what's interesting is it's not I observe or I see, it's I am aware, which again brings us into that moment of consciousness. How do you become aware of something? Often through your senses or through knowledge, but because this is something that is routine and monotonous, it seems like it's a expectation that they're having. And this short phrase here, "damp souls of housemaids," I think is very interesting because it's not something that you can necessarily see. You can see damp hair, damp skin, damp clothing, but damp souls of housemaids, I think, is an observation made by the speaker that you know, London's rainy, and how much do you get rained upon before it begins to truly like sink into your inner being, right? To have a damp soul to me suggests something that's really worn down and that is used to being um, in this state of kind of somberness and sadness. And then they're sprouting despondently at the gates, right? We have a stanza break then, and we get a different image. It's almost like out of a different pane of the window, right? Or like a cut scene, if you will. The brown waves of fog toss up to me. And this adds, because it's brown waves of fog, it adds this idea of industrialization and dirtiness. This is getting very grimy. We have dampness, and then we have brown waves of fog, and I could just imagine this kind of collecting as a sort of gross film on someone's face. The twisted faces at the bottom of the street, I think he's referring here to poor people, right, to the lower class that he's observing outside. Now, of course, the speaker, being on the inside, is protected and safe and separate from the damp souls and the brown faces. The brown waves of fog. And what does this do? What does the brown waves of fog toss up to him? It's almost as though through the breaks in the waves of the fog, he's able to get clearer views of the people who are wandering through it. And Eliot's really going to like this image we'll see in The Wasteland of almost zombie-like bodies just kind of wandering through a foggy, a dense, a obscure area that's hard to see or hard to be precise and to make out crystal images of. And so they wander, and then they toss this aimless smile that hovers in the air and vanishes along the level of the roofs. And I love this because it's a quick smile that then seems to sort of rise up, almost like a bubble being blown up, or like a balloon going into the air. And it rises up enough that it goes up to the roofs, which through this dense wave of brown fog suggests that there's something radiant about it, that the speaker can still see it. And if the first stanza was strictly observational and imagistic and kind of the cold, hard facts, the second one desires and opines for a moment of kind of quasi-transcendence among all of this heaviness and this dirt and this grime and monotony and routine of modern urban and industrial life. And that is that for the briefest of moments, there's an aimless smile, which is, again, not kind of directed at someone, but is a mark of recognizing the presence of other humans. You do this if you're walking in the mall, walking down the street, you just see someone, you just kind of, you know, a pleasantry, but a pleasantry that uh, acknowledges, recognizes, interpolates not just that there's another person there, but kind of the humanity in that other person. A lot of us, for example, don't smile at, well, I smile at deer and dogs, but bugs I wouldn't, right? If I saw a grasshopper, I wouldn't smile at the grasshopper necessarily. If I saw a snake, I would scream and run the other way. But with humans, you offer that pleasantry of acknowledgement and of recognition, even if it's not a word, even if it's not something that's intimate, right? And this aimless smile here, which is the recognition of other humans among this normal routine, it vanishes from the person's face, but that moment of attempted connection is the thing that becomes perhaps quasi transcendent. And so what I really like about this poem is it doesn't romanticize or linger upon the kind of horrible and monotonous day-to-day toilings of the urban lower class, and to try to fetishize their poverty, for example. But what it does do is it offers at least the suggestion that there's a beauty to the human connection that people can make almost instantaneously, and that is the thing that's going to possibly cut through all of this waste and detritus and the spill off from there. You can think almost the Valley of the Ashes in The Great Gatsby, but Eliot's offering us this kind of floating smile, and I think it's really nice. And there's a complexity and an ambiguity to it that I really love and appreciate. I said it was going to be short. I'm running up on 17 minutes now, but I think my enthusiasm for Eliot's poetry came out there, and I hope that it gave you something to reflect on, read, and think about, and maybe teases some of the richness. If we could get that out of 9 lines, imagine what we can do with much longer work. So thank you for being with us again today. Enjoy your day. I hope it's restful and restorative, and may peace be with you.